A long, long time ago, I used to be a child, yay! And as a child, I had friends, yay! Who were mostly my friends because our parents were friends, because we all kind of low-key hated each other, but maybe that's just the nature of preteen male friendship. Maybe it was me. Maybe there is something deeply, profoundly wrong with me, but anyway, I digress, okay? My friends and I used to play a game called Dungeons and Dragons. It was a tabletop role-playing game, or ttRPG, as the children call it, where you assume the persona of a make-believe character. You pick a class, which is kind of like a job but fun, and a race, which is elf. Then you roll some dice to determine how strong, smart, and most importantly, attractive your elf is. Then the dungeon master, who serves as both the storyteller and impartial, theoretically, mediator of the rules of the game, sets up the narrative, smooshes all the characters together in a convenient meeting spot, and tells you, here's a problem, go solve it. So you go to solve it, except on the way you end up getting into an argument about whose elf is the best elf. Swords get drawn, half the party ends up dead, and the game derails. Then you sit in a huff pretending not to be mad at your friends, even though you're totally mad at your friends, until your parents come to pick you up and you make plans to do it all again next weekend. Eventually, we dropped the game. Different schools, different schedules, different levels of enthusiasm, and also maybe the fact that we literally could not make it past session 1 90% of the time. I found new friends to play with, and we low-key hated each other only some of the time, which may reflect the increased social and emotional maturity that comes with aging. Or maybe the first group were just assholes. I'm honestly not sure, even to this day. Anyway, we played a game called Rifts, which was awesome, and a game I designed which used 12-sided dice like Daggerheart if Daggerheart were bad and made by a child. We played some other stuff too, it was fun, but I did not know at the time that we live in a perverse and cruel world where you grow up and form bonds and associations only for them to be ripped apart, and this happens again and again and again until you look around and recognize nothing. All around is strange, and every man a stranger, and you look inside, and there is a stranger looking back. Or maybe I'm just particularly bad at staying in touch with people. That's also possible. Anyway, the point is, okay, there's a point. I didn't get to play RPGs for a few decades, and honestly didn't think much of it until I felt my soul tearing, and I knew that if I didn't do something about it quickly, it would vanish altogether, leaving me a hollow husk in human form. I needed a hobby, preferably one that involved real face-to-face interactions with fellow humans. And so I found Pathfinder. Why Pathfinder? Well, let me share with you a little business secret about making your role-playing game successful in the obscenely overcrowded, hyper-saturated American RPG market. One way is to dump stupid amounts of money into advertising, multimedia, and various products to keep your game relevant in the cultural zeitgeist, i.e. the Hasbro/Dungeons & Dragons strategy. The other is stellar community organization, which is the Paizo/Pathfinder strategy. If you live in a sizable population area, yes, that is what they're called, sizable population areas. If you live in a sizable population area, chances are there's a group near you that runs pickup games of Pathfinder one-shots. You can sit down and play and make your own character that's persistent across games and grows more powerful with time, and meet people who share your hobbies. That's good. Yeah, it's called the Pathfinder Society, and it's how I got back into the game. Full disclosure, I'm not affiliated with Paizo in any capacity. I just play their game. I guess they send stuff to video creators from time to time, which is another strategy you can pursue to try and get your game out there. Advertising is advertising, I guess, which brings us to today's sponsor. Hi, so I was originally going to do a comedy sketch about crushing some caffeine pills into some Kool-Aid as a send-up of the G Fuel trash that people are shilling these days, but I realized that would be stupid and irresponsible, so here's some tea instead. Sponsored by tea. Okay, back to the show. Pathfinder. It's a tabletop role-playing game, kind of like Dungeons & Dragons, but what is it really? I mean, what is a game, man? Well, to understand Pathfinder specifically, let's do a bit of history. For successful game publishers to stay successful, they need to release new games, or to take their old games, tweak the rules and art, and release a new edition. Well, in the year 20XX, I don't remember when exactly, and I don't feel like looking it up, Wizards of the Coast, the publishers of D&D, did just that with D&D 4th edition. If I were to describe 4th edition, I would say it's a lot like the video game World of Warcraft, except unlike the video game World of Warcraft, where a computer keeps track of all the hidden maths, modifiers, variables, and cooldowns, thus giving you a smooth playing experience, D&D 4th edition asked a bunch of humans to do it around a table. I played it a few times myself, and I had a miserable time. Not because it was hard, exactly. It was actually probably easier to learn and play than D&D's previous installments, but mostly because it felt deeply, deeply tedious, and partially because it felt very, gamey. This concept's going to be important, we'll come back to it, but for now I'll just say 4th edition was not super popular among the ttRPG community, and here enters Paizo. Paizo was a little company publishing companion adventures for D&D, and when 4th edition landed with a wet thud, they saw an opportunity. They took the previous edition of D&D, nuts, bolts, and screws, tweaked it a little bit, and republished it as the game Pathfinder. How they got away with that without being sued to death by a historically very lawsuit-happy Wizards of the Coast, I have no idea. They had to make their own distinct fantasy lore and setting, but could otherwise capitalize on providing new content to people who essentially wanted to stick to how D&D's 3rd edition rule set played mechanically. So that was Pathfinder for a while. But like I said earlier, for successful game publishers to stay successful, they need to release new games, or to take their old games, tweak the rules and art, and release a new edition. So 10 years on, with increasingly Byzantine rules and content bloat, precarious balance, and power creep, it was time for this. Pathfinder 2nd edition. Did you like it? It's going away now because sometimes a company has a legal kerfuffle and needs to revise their product very quickly on the fly. So it's time for this. Pathfinder 2nd edition remastered. Oh, do you like having all the rules you need to play the game in one book? Too bad, because they put it in 2, one of which really didn't need to exist. Paizo, so what is it? How do you play it? Would you like it? Well, I do like it. And while I'm going to talk about some of its mechanics, I'm not going to teach you how to play it. That would take forever. What I really want to dive into is what it is, and hopefully you'll come away from that knowing whether or not you want to try it, but also maybe inform how you think about these kinds of games and your own experience that you have while playing them. So this is not really a discussion of Pathfinder's rules. I'm sorry if you clicked on the video thinking that, but wait, don't leave, because this is still a discussion of Pathfinder, but the vibes. Because I think that people new to the hobby of tabletop role-playing gaming tend to get hyper-focused on small details like the particulars of rules or mechanics that they like or dislike, or what should be added, or what makes a good character or a good encounter, or even what makes a good narrative or good character backstory. Single page, 11-point font, 0.5-inch margins, double-spaced, please. But when people say that they want this or that change or rule or concept in a game, I kind of wonder what it is they really want. Because if you play RPGs long enough, you'll find yourself thinking more and more what is a game, man? So, what is a game, man? Well, the academic definition of a role-playing game is some bullshit I don't care about. I'm here to have a good time with my friends, specifically by playing a role-playing game, whatever that is. So let's go through the 3 things we need for that. The 3 pillars of ttRPG gaming, according to me. The first thing and the second thing are people, because people come in 2 flavors. Human flavor number 1 is an arbiter. This is the person who, quote-unquote, runs the game. What that means can change from game to game, but their responsibilities include knowing the rules, setting up and preparing some sort of content ahead of time for players to play, mediating disputes, making calls, determining what players can and cannot do, etc. Every game seems to have some sort of kitsch and precious name for the arbiter, like Dungeon Master or Storyteller or Keeper, or most commonly GM. I've never actually heard the role be called Arbiter, but I'm sure some game somewhere calls it that. Leave a comment if you know. Okay, that was human flavor number 1. human flavor number 2 is the player, okay? These scum, these filth, these children who constantly mess with the Arbiter and ruin his hard work and preparation are expected to show up on time and play and have fun. They may have other responsibilities depending on the game. The third thing you need are the rules. That is how you play the game. They're important. They determine what you can and can't do as a player or arbiter, or sometimes what you have to do as player or arbiter. It's how you explore or fight or get stronger or interact in the simulated world you're in together. People really like diving into the particulars of rules, but opinion time, the most important thing that the rules do, straight off the bat, the thing I think doesn't get talked enough about, is that they set up the relationship between these 3 pillars of gaming. Yes, this isn't just a list of things you need, it's actually a graph in disguise. Each of these lines actually represents a relationship spectrum between the 2 connecting elements, showing the relative weight of responsibility for each for making the game happen. What does that mean? Let's break it down. Here is the line running between arbiter and rules. At this extreme, the arbiter is the rules. Whatever the arbiter says goes, and the arbiter themselves do not actually have to follow any rules of their own. The other extreme is a game that runs itself. You don't need an arbiter. Everything you need to play is in the book already. This describes games like, 100-Year-Old Vampire. That's a good example. Or a choose-your-own-adventure book. Or maybe a campaign-styled board game like Gloomhaven or Madara. Over here is the line running between rules and players. This one's a little trickier to describe, but think of it as how constrained a player is by the rules and affecting the game world. A good example of the quote-unquote rules extreme would be something like a virtual tour of an art gallery. You can click to walk around and look at stuff, and that's about it. On the other extreme, whatever a player feels like doing or saying or just happening in the moment goes until it runs afoul of the other relationship axis, which is the final axis, the one between player and arbiter. Gets a lot of attention because a lot of things can go wrong here on a social level, but the social stuff is a bit outside our scope right now. This is meant to represent the relative responsibility between these 2 parties for making the game function as dictated by the rules/mechanics in the game. So on the player extreme, you're playing a game where you don't need an arbiter, and on the arbiter extreme, I guess you're reading a bedtime story to your kids or whatever. Where a game ends up on this axis depends on how much each side has the ability to impact the game world and the narrative as determined by the rules of the game. So if we go back to our triangle, we can eyeball these relationships a little and draw a little zone where our hypothetical game lives. This is the zone you're in while playing the game, and it really impacts the feeling you have in the moment while playing the game. Over here is sort of like the board game zone. When you're feeling this feeling of playing a board game, it's because you're in this zone. Here is the improv club zone. This is the listening to someone read a novel to you zone. Any of these can be a role-playing game zone, but I would say this is the classic role-playing game zone. But that's still a big area and can produce a big difference in the immediate feel of playing game to game. So how does Pathfinder feel? Well, let's first talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Why? Well, if you've ever played a role-playing game before, it's probably D&D, so it's a good reference point to start. Also, I already told you how Pathfinder started out as D&D, so this helps in seeing how it evolved. Let's look at our graph. Yes, look at the graph. How does the Arbiter interact with the rules? Well, if you read some of the horror stories on Reddit, the internet site that the children use, you might think all the power is here with the Arbiter. Wrong. The D&D rule set is what I would call simulationist. It provides a set of rules for simulating the world and how players interact with its various elements, usually by stabbing and throwing fireballs, but it's pretty strict about who you can stab and when you can stab and how you can stab. As an arbiter, it's your job to create a fun world and people to stab for your players, or maybe you run a module that does all that for you, which is a great way to learn how to run games, by the way, but you have to know the rules and follow them stringently. And make sure the players follow them or your game breaks down. People say jokingly that the Arbiter is God, but really the Arbiter is more like God's deeply harassed middle manager trying to keep the simulation from breaking apart. So in this axis, we'll say D&D lives here-ish because its rules are abstract enough that the Arbiter has a lot of wiggle room to run things the way they want. Okay, now we go over to the rule/player axis, and we see some of the same themes, except I think the players are much more constrained than the Arbiter in terms of how they can interact with the world narratively and mechanically, at least in Dungeons & Dragons. You want to stab a dude? Well, first you have to move up to the dude, and then you have to have your stabby knife out, and it has to be your turn, and you can't just stab him. What you actually do is try to stab him, etc. Stabbing isn't just a choice, it's a procedural checklist you need to follow according to the rules of the simulation. But speaking of choice, you have plenty. You don't have to stab the dude, you can run away and hide so you can stab the dude later. You can apply poison to your stabby knife to stab the dude better. You can throw the knife and stab the dude at a distance. You might shout, "Hey, look behind you," so the dude turns around and you can stab the dude in the back. That's using your noggin and your skills. Let's talk about skills. At some point, the creators of D&D realized that the players want to interact in a world in a way that's not just stabbing, but this led to a lot of player-arbiter arguments about what can and can't be done by a given character at any given time. So they implemented skills. If you played 3rd edition or later, you don't even have to be a thief to use skills. This actually pushes where we live on this axis rightward, away from the players and towards the rules. It seems paradoxical, right? Like more options should be more player focused, but hear me out. By specifically codifying ways you can interact with the world, you might think you are giving your players more options. Realistically, you are not. If anything, you're sort of pigeonholing their choices down to a limited pool of options. This isn't necessarily bad, and it'll come around when we talk about Pathfinder proper, but back to the graph, I think we'll put D&D here with the caveat that we're ignoring all the high power stuff that just straight up lets players break reality. Okay, finally, player-arbiter axis. Again, we're ignoring the social aspects of table culture and group dynamics because these sort of live in their own world that's independent, maybe partially dependent on the mechanics of the game you're actually playing. Assuming a group of functional human beings, this axis is about the balance of responsibilities between the Arbiter and the players needed to make the game go. Most people probably think D&D lives here. I think D&D lives here. Realistically, it probably can live anywhere between these 2 points. I think mechanically it's designed to live between these 2 points and fluctuate as needed, not just between groups, but potentially even in the same group over the course of a play session. This is because most of the time you want the players to be driving the action, as they are the only truly agentic beings in a simulated world. And even with the rules-constrained toolset of how they can affect the world, the players are capable of a lot of bullshit. But sometimes the Arbiter needs to step in and move the action along, convey a scene, do some dialogue at the expense of player choice if necessary. So when the big evil wizard is giving his big evil monologue and the players are patiently waiting until they can stab him, you're living up here. And when the players are getting sidetracked, burning down the local tavern, even though you, as the Arbiter, told them they need to go to the evil wizard forest to fight the evil wizard, you're living down here. Past this point or so, I would say, is where the rules of the game you're playing directly and mechanically give control of elements of the narrative to the players, like them being able to tell the Arbiter what they'll be encountering when they walk into a room or finding when they open a chest. So D&D lives here, here, and here, and if we plot this on our relationship space axis, it will put us somewhere around here. And I think here is where most published role-playing games live because, well, they ultimately share a design space and can only change so much and remain functional. But don't be fooled. Even a small shift in this relationship space or where you are in this relationship space can massively affect the feel of the game for you, personally. So let's design a hypothetical game a little. How do you implement mechanics to adjust the feel of the game? Check it out, we can use different dice. Well, Daggerheart uses 2d12s to determine attack rolls, and that's like a massive change. The dice don't matter, okay? Say it with me, the dice don't matter. Like, they matter a little bit, I guess, because I guess you can screw up the math under the hood of your game so bad that it becomes either very boring or literally unplayable, but otherwise the dice don't matter. And it drives me up the wall because we as hobbyists are so focused on it to the point that the dice system might be the first thing we describe when talking about a game. But when we sit down to play a game and not to test out someone's novel random number generator system. I have played many a game, and in terms of the feel of the game, differences in which one of these little geometric shapes you use is the least impactful thing. Yeah, you agree, don't you? Yeah, dice are stupid. So let's keep the dice the same, but you know, the dice are usually used to determine success or failure of something you're trying to do. But that's boring and binary. Why don't we add partial success and partial failure to make things more interesting and liven them up? Okay, great. Well, now you have an entirely different game. It's called Powered by the Apocalypse, and it fucking sucks. I hate it. Sorry, what I meant to say is you have added mechanics that put major constraints, primarily on the Arbiter, who kind of wishes you succeeded or failed, but your abject failure to roll dice properly now means they are forced by the game to figure out what partial success or partial failure means in this situation. So the point where we live on this little axis actually shifts from the Arbiter to the rules. Sometimes a high degree of success gives the player some control over the narrative flow of the game, and in this case, this moves us both towards the player side on the player rules axis and also towards the player side on the player arbiter axis. Alternatively, you have a game like Pathfinder with rigid and highly codified system of degrees of success that don't give the player any extra agency, don't necessarily take it away either, so you do change this dynamic without really affecting the other two. So to summarize, by adding degrees of success and making a fairly simple conceptual change to your game, you have potentially shifted it either this way or this way. Over in this direction live games that I would say are mechanically designed to get you to focus on the story and the narrative. Over in this direction are games that are more gamey, like there's a lot of game in your game, and in the moment you feel like you're playing a game. Go too far in this direction and you get something like Gloomhaven or Madara, narrative campaign board games with no arbiter, where the players can occasionally make choices as dictated by the narrative, and sometimes the emergent gameplay choice of letting your friends die so you can get all the treasure for yourself. Christian. So then you're like, okay, narrative. I love narrative. My favorite role-playing shows have so much narrative and big character moments where the players are all acting at each other and it's super dramatic and great. This is my favorite one, by the way. Let's make a game with mechanics that reward players for doing narrative stuff or force players to do narrative stuff. Well, be careful, because the more you force narrative mechanically, the more agency it takes away from the players and the arbiter, and you paradoxically start to slide away from the narrative zone back into the gaming zone. Let's look at the game Delta Green, okay? When you make a character in Delta Green, you also make them some bonds who represent typically people, unless you're playing an absolute psycho and your bond is a parrot, who you have people who you have an emotional attachment to, okay? So when bad stuff happens to you in the game, you can mitigate the consequences by damaging a bond instead, and now you have this interesting choice as a player. Do I get killed by this horrible tentacle monster, or do I have an awkward roleplay conversation with the arbiter later about how I'm divorcing my wife? Now that is a choice. And I love this mechanic. Is it gamey? Fundamentally, yes, you are basically committing to narrative in exchange for character health. But it's well designed and gives players a good amount of agency, and isn't super heavy-handed. Delta Green, great game. But what about Pathfinder? Where does it live in the triangle of gaming? Well, down here. It's gamey. People will tell you Pathfinder has a lot of rules. That's true, although I don't think it's as complex as people make it out to be. More to the point, I think people will tell you that if you want to do something in Pathfinder, there's a rule for that. This is more true for Pathfinder than for most comparable games. But I think what 90% of what these people are really trying to say and are trying to tell you is that Pathfinder is a gamey-ass game. If I were to describe its design in one word, I would say it's simulationist. If I had 2 words, I would say it's very simulationist. Hey, so I know I'm using the terms game narrative and simulation, and there's something called GNS theory that also uses the terms game narrative and simulation, and is also about role-playing games. I don't know what GNS theory is. I've just kind of vaguely heard of it. How does my stuff fit into GNS theory? No idea. Just wanted to mention that. Okay, so I looked into GNS a little more since it sounded kind of like what I'm talking about, and it turns out it isn't, okay? And I wanted to talk about it a little. So theoretically, GNS is about dividing role-playing game enjoyers on a social level into three categories, G, N, or S, and approaching game design in a way that services G, N, or S players. Practically speaking, it's a lot of quibbling about categories, subcategories, and who falls into which and why. Explaining these categories seems to me like a waste of time, because as someone who feels like a G on a Monday, an N on a Tuesday, and an S on a Wednesday, I don't think these are useful or real categories. No, bad. Like, the basic message of you should lean into the game you enjoy most is something I do agree with, but I think sorting the already niche category of RPG enthusiasts into yet more categories and using that as a prescriptivist first principles approach to thinking about games is straight up wrong. And I think that actually practically designing games using this approach would be disastrous. Okay, back to the triangle. The triangle, so why do I think my approach to analysis is better? Well, less assumptions, mostly. Okay, so I'm looking at real things that really exist, so players, arbiter, rules, and how those things interact on a tangible level. Mostly from the perspective of the rules. If rule X encourages the player or even forces a player to take a certain approach to doing thing Y, that affects the game meaningfully, and you can prove this. You can actually prove this by seeing how a player changes their approach to the game. Okay, the converse is true as well. Like, if there's a void unfilled by a rule or mechanic, that will change the player's approach. So I'm not going to make any social or psychological assumptions about you and what you want as a player. Okay, that's all up to you to figure out. Okay, I fully concede that there is a social element to games, personality, table culture, relationships, whatever, that can affect the game or the feeling of the game dramatically. A lot of RPG theory lives in the social space because it's a fun space to talk about. GNS theory is a social theory. For a fun and much better example of social theory, check out Seth Skorkowski's video on roleplay terrorists. Yeah, that's a fun one. Okay, but if my triangle is here, then the social space is like here, above it, in a higher dimension. Okay, the triangle itself is the material space, like the things that exist and that interact meaningfully. So I'm going to call my theory the materialist theory. All right, my thesis is, fundamentally, that changes here are going to experience or are going to affect your experience of playing the game wherever you live on the social space. Okay. Ooh, it'll change. Like, you're here, but this will move, and kind of you will move. That's what I think, anyway. So you GNS enthusiasts and I can agree on at least one thing, and that the system does matter, okay? I think system does matter. So back to the rant about simulationist design. Yay. By this, I mean it tries to take into account everything you as a player might reasonably want to do to the world, and everything the world can do to you, and then make a rule or a chain of rules to account for that. Now, simulationist design is baked into the role-playing game genre because the genre owes a lot to D&D, and D&D's design was a spin-off from a war game, and war games exist because a few hundred years ago, some Germans wanted to realistically simulate battle conditions on a tabletop to train their commanders. But simulationist design can be a broad space. When making the rules for how players interact with the world, you can go more abstract or more meticulous. I'm not going to use the word realistic. I think it's a fake word. Doesn't actually describe what people are trying to describe with it. Let's go back to our hypothetical game and kind of split it two ways into two hypothetical games and see how they might handle things. Imagine this situation, okay? You just stabbed a dude, but before he died, okay, he activated a bomb collar around your pet bunny, like any self-respecting villain would in that situation. Now, you need to think quickly, or your bunny goes boom. Well, over here, we have an abstract game. Your character is mostly defined mechanically by three abilities: strong, smart, and fast. You attach some numbers, and how high those numbers are represents how good you are at a thing that requires strength, intelligence, or a good 100-meter dash time. I don't know, we're making shit up on the fly, okay? Just bear with me. Whenever you want to do something in this game, you see which of these abilities this plan leverages best. Roll a dice, add the numbers together, and if the result is high enough, you succeed. So in this scenario, you might use smart to disarm the bomb before it detonates, and your bunny lives to explode another day. But maybe you want to use strong to punch the bomb to death, and the arbiter has to step in and say, no, actually, that's a bad plan and it won't work. And you counter by saying, no, actually, my character spent a month training with mountain monks in the ancient art of bomb punching, so I can punch the bomb to death. However this argument pans out, I think you can see how a highly abstract system puts more responsibility on the players to come up with a plan and the arbiter to judge it. But whatever plan you do end up implementing gets handled by just one rule: roll dice, add number. Now let's look at a meticulous game. Your character can still be mechanically defined by the abilities strong, smart, and fast, but now these abilities might influence skills, like under strong we have weightlifting, climbing, and hitting things, and under smart we have differential equations. And under fast, we have running and bomb disarmament. Why fast? I don't know. Games like to spread things out, so everything feels useful. You still have numbers under your strong, smart, and fast abilities to represent how good you are at these things broadly, but you also have numbers for specific skills to represent your training, and your ability numbers influence your skill numbers according to a mathematical formula of some sort. So now, to disarm the bomb, you have to use the bomb disarmament skill that is governed by your fast attribute, but you also have a pool of action points that limits how much stuff you can do in a turn, and of movement speed because you have to move up to the bunny before you can begin disarming the bomb. But to even perform the bomb disarmament action, you need to possess the Type 2 or Type 4 mechanical toolkit. Okay, 2 or 4, 1 and 3 won't cut it. Once you have successfully navigated all of that, now you roll this dice and add the relevant number, and if the result is high enough, you have saved your bunny. The arbiter in this situation is mostly there to set up the scene and check your work. So if solving my Save the Bunny puzzle in the abstract game is a puzzle of what to do, in the meticulous game, what to do is outlined in the rules, and it becomes a puzzle of how to do it. It may sound like I'm saying abstract good, meticulous bad. I'm not. If anything, I prefer the meticulous style games and tend to get bored quickly with the abstract kind, personally. But again, that's sort of it's your thing. It's up to you. This is how you feel about games. All I'm saying is that the mechanics can force you into a certain playstyle, even if they're not directly forcing you to do anything. The exact same situation in Game A and Game B will end up feeling very different to you, the player, in the moment, as well as to the arbiter. Pathfinder is a very meticulous game, and a deeply meticulous game. I won't go into wide versus deep design, but to put it simply, if you don't like the way something works in Pathfinder, you are shit out of luck, because that mechanism interacts with 5 others, as well as equipment and character features, and minor changes can break the game in major and unexpected ways. You will play Pathfinder the way Pathfinder wants you to play Pathfinder. But all of this combines to make Pathfinder a gamey-ass game. You know how I mentioned how I absolutely hated 4th edition D&D, and one of my core complaints was how gamey it felt? Well, 4E was also a very gamey game. Does that mean I hate Pathfinder for the same reasons? No, maybe a little bit, but mostly no. The gaminess does sometimes bother me. In fact, with Pathfinder, but it bothers me a lot less since the rules of the game are better and more in-the-moment fun. But some of you might compare Pathfinder to 4E or say it feels like 4E, and to you I say, I get it, because both games live here. I actually like Pathfinder though. So what's it actually about, okay? Well, Pathfinder is a class-based and level-based sword and sorcery fantasy role-playing game that gives players a lot of... Pathfinder is a game about murder. You want to make a character in Pathfinder? Great! It's easy once you learn. It takes me about 10 minutes these days. First, you pick an ancestry like elf, or I guess you can go with something else if you really want. They all have abilities that make you good at murder and give you points to numbers that make you good at murder. Then you pick your background. This is what you did before your career changed to aspiring murderer. Backgrounds give you skills, which we'll get to, and give you more murder number points. Then you pick your class. This is probably the most important choice you will ever make in this game as a player, because it dictates what weapons you use to murder, whether you can use magic to murder, gives you special features that make specific forms of murder more effective, determines how good you are at not getting murdered yourself, and gives you a ton of choices for special abilities to tailor your murder style to your own personal murder preferences. This last part is very much the selling point of Pathfinder as a game. Between class choice and feat choice, you have so many options. Sure, some of them suck and will never be chosen, but A, that's inevitable, and B, we'll get back to this. Your class also gives you more murder numbers, and you add a few free murder numbers on top of that. Now you check these murder numbers, which are your primary murder numbers, and use them to fill in a few dependent secondary murder numbers. Step 2, almost done. You just need some skills that determine how good you are at interacting with the world in various ways, and all of those ways are murder. Acrobatics lets you get around obstacles and escape getting grabbed, mostly good for not getting murdered. Athletics lets you grab, trip, or push people around to make them easier to murder. Arcana, nature, occultism, religion, and society let you figure out what your victim's weakness is to make murdering them easier. If you're wondering why you need 5 different skills for that, so am I. Crafting lets you repair equipment and make new equipment between murder sessions. Deception and intimidation can let you distract or frighten enemies mid-combat for smoother murdering. Diplomacy is admittedly not very useful in combat until you hit a high enough level and take a specific ability, and then you can be like, no, the combat is over, I used diplomacy and that is a high number on my magic dice, so we stop fighting now. That's the rules. Medicine lets you avoid being murdered by healing yourself and your friends. Performance is a skill primarily used by the bard class to make their friends better at murder. Stealth lets you murder sneakily. Survival doesn't have a lot of murder utility, which is why nobody invests in the skill. We'll get back to that. Thievery lets you pick locks and disable traps and hazards, and while it's not explicitly murder-oriented, hazards can be present in combats, so by dealing with those, you're clearing the field for your allies to get to murdering. There are also lore skills. What are lore skills? Well, they're completely useless, but you can't get rid of them because it mechanically breaks the bard class. Okay, that's the skill rundown, but skills also have skill feats, special little abilities that you can get that make your skills more powerful. And by more powerful, I mean better at murdering. Are there feats that are not murder related? Yes, but nobody takes them, and we'll get back to that. Equipment. It's all murder here, all murder all the way down. Spells. Maybe you picked a class with magic. Mistake for first-time player, but whatever. Now you can murder people with fire or electricity or ice. Or you can make them weaker with your magic so the guy with a sword can murder them better. Are there spells not directly related to murder? Yes, but they're bad and nobody takes them, and we'll get to that. So is it all murder all the time? Well, no, alright, I guess no, technically no. Sometimes you need to get from place A, where you just murdered everyone, to place B, where your next murders will happen. There's a whole exploration mode mechanic, and sometimes you'll encounter obstacles. Mostly, Pathfinder the system wants you to solve the obstacles using your skill numbers, and there's rules and mechanics around that. Sometimes it may even be worth to take a skill ability or spell without direct murder utility, because it's sufficiently useful and likely to come up. But mostly, it isn't. And let's talk about that. Pathfinder, like I said, is a game about murder. And murder leads to material wealth and personal gain, both of which make you better at murdering. It's just economics 101 again. Murder enough, and you level up. Yay! And most of your numbers go up by 1. Yay! And you get to pick new abilities and buy stuff. Yay! Now, which abilities do you pick, or what new items do you buy? Multiple choice time. Yay! Choice A, things that make you better at murder, or choice B, things which maybe sound cool but are weird or situational or don't make you better at murder. Remember, you have limited ability improvement opportunities and cash, so it's one or the other. Or, let's ramp it up to the extreme. You have a cool character idea for like a fighter who can't fight because his fighter parents forced him to go to fighter school and he really just wanted to be a bard. So you intentionally pick murder numbers that don't work and choose abilities that mechanically don't synergize. Well, now you're sitting in a corner while all your friends are having fun murdering because murder is the game. Are you having fun? I don't know. I don't live in your head. But I have been where you are now with various games, and chances are you are wishing you could be playing a different game. Pathfinder rewards, and I would even say demands, proactive engagement with its mechanics for you to have fun. Friction between roleplay choices and game mechanics exists in most games, at least most games I've played, to some extent, but Pathfinder is a game that actively disrespects and spits on your roleplay choices if those choices run counter to its mechanics. This tends to mean that the Pathfinder rule set supports a certain style of gameplay. Like here's an example, okay? Brennan Lee Mulligan has a narrative story-focused role-playing show that's about magical kids attending magical high school. He runs it using a modified Dungeons & Dragons rule set, and while I've never seen the show and I don't know how that works mechanically, I'm not surprised. If I wanted to run that kind of game, I personally would use a modified Call of Cthulhu rule set, but I don't disagree with using D&D if that's your thing. But I absolutely would not use Pathfinder if you put a gun to my head. Hi, I guess one of the other things I didn't discuss explicitly is system evolution, because while Pathfinder evolved to be more explicitly mechanically about combat on basically every level, D&D kind of went the opposite way from 4th edition, back into sort of the abstract zone, which, means it has a wider space for different kinds of playstyles than Pathfinder does. I don't think Pathfinder is bad from a narrative perspective. I've had great narrative and character moments playing Pathfinder, and that's because, Pathfinder doesn't really force narrative mechanics one way or another, but it does just on the basis of what it has, the rules it has, and what the rules make you do, and the way the rules make you play, tends to lean away from that in the gamey direction. Anyway. Yep, that's some good tea. Could I theoretically do some sort of Pathfinder conversion high school shenanigans? Yes, but it would be stupidly hard and just run counter to the point of the game. But if I wanted to run a game where you explore dungeons and fight dragons, Pathfinder would be my #1 game system of choice, because it is a great system for that style of game. Honestly, the best system for that style of game that I have ever played, because it's specifically designed for that style of game. The rules are tight, the pacing is good once you know what you're doing, and the rules complexity leads to some fun game dynamics rather than situations where you're spending 10 minutes going from spreadsheet to spreadsheet just to resolve an attack. I really like Pathfinder. Fight evil, use cool powers, get cool stuff, get stronger, and do it all again, but better. So let me tell you about a time I really hated Pathfinder. I was playing the adventure Fall of Plaguestone with my regular group, and I started out loving it. I was a player here. This story will have major spoilers for this scenario, by the way, just a heads up for you. If you're playing it or you're interested in playing it, just skip ahead a little bit. Here, I'll put a thing on the screen. Okay, skip. But back to the story, okay? Our player characters were traveling with a theater group or circus performers or some such, and it was just fun to roleplay with those characters. And I had a blast. And then we got back in town and had a bar fight, and then, oh no, one of the characters we'd gotten attached to was murdered. Who could have done it? I don't know, the town had a dark history and mysterious things were going on. Ooh, so mysterious. And I was hyped to solve the shit out of this mystery, okay? Maybe we were on a clock and other characters around us would start dying as the killer enacted their plan. Maybe they would target us in a delightfully sneaky and unexpected way. Except, no. One skill check later, we learned that it was an evil wizard living in the evil wizard house. So we go in the evil wizard house and we murder some stuff in one room, and then we go to the next room and we murder some more stuff. Then we find an evil lab. Ooh, so evil. And here's some narrative flavor. Ooh, wow, narrative flavor. And here's some treasure. Wow, some treasure. Now on to the next room to murder some more stuff. Then, bloodied and battered, we finally made it to the evil wizard and I pushed him down a pit. My GM, which is what Pathfinder calls an arbiter, was very unhappy about it, but the rules be the rules. I made my athletics check to murder, and he failed his grab the edge check to not be murdered, and that was that, okay? Other players don't get to do their things or have fun? Not my problem. Combat over. I win the game. You're running them rules as written, and them's the rules in this here book on this here page. And if I sound like an asshole, it's because I am, or was, or whatever. I was being an asshole because I was kind of done with the game. I was done with the game because I was not having fun. And I was not having fun because I was hyped for a murder mystery investigation, and I got a paint-by-numbers dungeon crawl instead. Was it the scenario's fault? No, not really. Was it my GM's fault? No, absolutely not. That leaves us with the sad reality that it was my fault. I was frustrated and took it out on the game, and to a lesser extent, the group, in a petty act of revenge, and the magic number ball just happened to roll my way. I still feel a little bad about it. Don't be like me, okay? Firstly, know what you're getting into, and I hope my little analysis helped you think about that. But you're not always going to know, and frustration is inevitable. And if you're frustrated, try to roll with it and figure out why, and put together a plan to fix whatever it is you're frustrated by, be it with a group, the game itself, or maybe even yourself. And I guarantee you, your next game will be better. For my part, this was the early days of playing Pathfinder, and I've come to really love it. But whenever I am sitting down to play Pathfinder, I know what I'm sitting down to play. A gamey-ass game about murder. Out of 10. But while we roll credits, here's some fun facts. Yes, fun facts. So fun. Fun fact 1. I think that the way the mechanics of the game affect the dynamics of the playstyle so forcingly is why so much Pathfinder community content is just builds. Like, hey bro, your character not murdery enough? Check out this ultimate gunslinger build. Know what equipment to buy and feats to take to turn you into a murder machine. Builds, 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 builds. Fun fact 2. There's this class called the Investigator, which is flavored as, being smart and solving crimes, but since Pathfinder is a game about murder, all of its features, of course, have to have murder utility. So you can envisage your murder target and get bonuses for finding them and, intellectually ponder how best to murder them. And when you roll the magic polyhedron, you can choose to strike. Or, if it's a bad number, hold off and then murder them later. And holy shit, this is just the serial killer class, isn't it? Fun fact 3! Due to how Pathfinder's level scaling skills work, a level 10 character can't fail at things a level 1 character would struggle with. This affects skill use in weird ways at high levels, which I kind of get on one hand and have problems with on the other. But the more pertinent thing is that a level 1 and a level 10 character cannot be mechanically in the same room doing the same task at the same time. If that ever were to happen, they would mutually annihilate in a skill-anti-skill reaction, destroying the planet and forcing everyone to go live in space instead. This is, canonically, what happened in Starfinder. Don't check me on that. What's Starfinder? It's a gamey-ass game about murder in space. It's pretty good. I like it.